pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Glassball?
Here.
Mrs. Hildebrand? Here. Mrs. Hoskins?
Here.
Mr. Bob Jones?
Here.
Mr. Tony Jones? Mrs. Shaw? And student representatives.
Here.
And if you could call the calendar, please.
Tuesday, January 22nd, 2019, there's a CLAC meeting at 6:30 at Davisville Academy. And Tuesday, January 29th, there is a school committee business meeting.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda are presentations and recognitions. Dr. O'Shea, did you have anything you wanted to mention before the presentation, or we can do the presentation first?
We'll start with the presentation.
Okay. So we'll begin with our presentation on school accountability results.
Riveting topic. Okay, so the accountability system is a requirement from the federal government with the ESSA, which is the Every Student Succeeds Act. And so we have the system that I'm going to share with you tonight. So here are the major changes. First of all, there are updated indicators. Secondly, the classifications are based on star ratings. So years ago, going back to our other accountability systems, we had labels such as commended or leading or typical or focus or priority. Now it's simply a five-star to one-star rating. So that's one of the main differences. And it's based on multiple indicators. Also in the past, we had what's called the composite index score. So we had areas of different measures, but the final result for the rating was an aggregate of all of the points that you received in each of those categories. Now it's different. Now you have to be able to perform in every area. So really one category, if you're very strong in one category, it doesn't, but you're weak in another, the strong one will not mask the weak one. So it's a strong accountability in that sense. So here you have all of the different measures, and I'm going to go through each one on another slide. But we have academic performance is really the primary driver of this system. And that is basically achievement and growth, and that's based on the state assessments. So, and all of our state assessments are basically new. The RICAST is new. The DLM for that's our alternate assessment is also new. SAT is not new to us, but it's new as a part of our state assessment. Also, I wanted to point out that most of these measures have been mandated by ESSA, but the Department of Education, the state, had some say as to what exactly they were going to count. So under academic performance, you'll see the achievement and growth that come from the state assessments. You also see English language proficiency, which also is based on achievement on our state tests. The science is yet to be added to the system. That will be added in a few years. And then under student success, we have now all of these factors count together for a certain rating. And we have student absenteeism, this is for chronic absenteeism. We have teacher absenteeism, also chronic, and suspension rates, and then exceeding expectations. But I'll explain each one of those in a minute. And then we have a graduation rate for the high schools, and there are two other measures that are going to be added called graduate proficiency and diploma plus. Also, now this is the classification system, but also on the report card, if you go in to look at the report card, there's additional information, and that includes our survey works results, as well as school level funding and civil rights data. So you can just about access anything. It's a pretty transparent system. All right, so in looking at each one of the measures, you'll see one of the things, you'll actually see the tool that's being used, so you can see the state assessments, the English language proficiency, the test that's actually used for measurement is we call it the WIDA access test. We give it every year, and the students are taking it right now. That's for our ELL population. Another thing that I'd like to point out is that the data is based on 2 years of data. So for the growth measure, for example, they're looking at the results of PARCC to the RICAS test. For the SAT, in future years it'll be the growth from PSAT to SAT. But in this particular case, it was the PARCC results to the PSAT. So that's something that a lot of people are not aware of. On the student success measures, basically the chronic absenteeism comes out, it's 10% of the school year, so it's usually 180 days for most school systems, so it's 18 days. The measure for a teacher absenteeism gets very tricky because if a teacher is part-time, it's sort of prorated, so that if a teacher is, for example, a 0.5, it doesn't take 18 days, it only takes 9 days for a teacher to be out, and that counts as chronic absenteeism. In addition, the amount of time that a teacher is in front of a subgroup is also counted. So in the elementary level, for example, if a classroom teacher has chronic absenteeism and has a certain population of say students with IEP, students with disabilities in that class, each time that she has them during the day counts towards the sort of penalty, if you will. So in the elementary school, when a classroom teacher has the same class, for English, for math, social studies, science, that group is counting each time. So in a way, it can get inflated and it can run away with you pretty easily. So it's pretty complicated. We've looked at a lot of data. Not everybody yet has a handle on it. Also, I want to point out the student absenteeism. It says all students. That's K through 12, and our suspension rates all students pre-K to 12. And the last one that's there, the exceeds academic expectations, that's for students who receive a 4. So the students who really excel on all of the assessments, and that's including the SAT. So the next one, the college and career readiness measures. As I said, the 2 that are there, 2 out of 3 are yet to be added for future years. The graduation rate is actually, it's a composite rate, so it's based on 3 cohorts. And the reason for that is if they based it on just one cohort and waited to you got the results for the 5th year, you'd be not having the results for 3 years out. So they decided to go with a composite score. So it's equal weights to the 4, 5, and 6 year graduation rates. So this shows.
Sorry, Dr. Can we go back? Do you want to wait or?
Yeah, but why don't we do it at the end,
Okay.
if you don't mind?
Yeah, no, whatever.
Okay. This slide shows you the maximum points in each of the the stars. So I just want to point out. So if you follow this going across here, anybody who scores right. And you better not touch it. Anybody who scores across the top, that's the 5-star rating. If you go to the next row, that's the 4-star, then the 3-star, then the 2-star, and the 1-star. So for a 1-star, they only get 2 points for achievement. That means that it's only 1 point for ELA and 1 point for math. And here for growth, same thing, 1 point for each. So it's very low. Okay, so this gives you an example of a school. This is an elementary school. This is a ride slide. It's not one of our schools. And you see the categories that this school scored in. Now, what happens with this, if you look at, normally you look at a rubric and you say, oh, they're predominantly a 2, or in this case, it's even. It would be between a 2 and a 3. But what happens is it goes by the weakest indicator. So if you were looking at this, then the rating is a 3-star rate. I mean, is a 2-star. No, 3-star rating, not a 4-star rating. And then on the side here, we have the subgroups, and I'm going to be talking about that. So you can have a school that is on a 5-star rating or a 4-star rating, but let's stick with the 5-star rating, and have one subgroup that didn't perform up to the cut scores, and that will drop that school down a whole ranking. And that's exactly what happened with Hamilton Elementary School. They're a 5-star rating in all of their categories except for one of the subgroups, which was the students with disabilities. And so if you have just one subgroup, it brings you down. And if you have 2 or more, then you go down to the next level as well. So there are the 5 stars. I mean, it's pretty basic: strong performance, generally strong, etc., down to the 1 with the lowest performance. And so these are our results. So we're very, very fortunate. And as I said, the primary drivers in this system are the achievement and growth. And as you know from the RIDECAST scores that I shared last month, or whenever it was, the last presentation, we were very strong in our performance. And so that has boosted our rankings. And so we have two schools that are 5-star ratings. The high school, and the high school is 1 of 4 in the state. And we have Wickford Middle School as 1 of 3 in the state to get a 5-star rating. And then we have 3 schools that are 4-star ratings and 3 schools that are 3-star ratings. So we have no 2 stars and we have no 1 stars. So it's really good news in that respect. So I included this slide just to give you a perspective of where people fell across the state as far as the star rankings. And once again, you see the 3 stars for the 3 schools for the middle school for 5-star rating. So those 3 were North Cumberland, Barrington, and Wickford Middle School. And then for the high school, under the 5-star rating, it was East Greenwich, Barrington, Classical, and NK High School. So it's nice to be up there with the in that ranking. Okay, so now this is this news is not as cheery, and it's also a little bit complicated to understand. So I'm going to try to explain it in as plain English as I can. We have some schools in our district that do fall in these categories. So I'm going to be very transparent about this. What happens is if you have a subgroup that performs at a 1-star level, and it's just even one subgroup, then that school is identified for what's called TSI, which is Targeted Support and Improvement. In addition to that, there's another subset below that. But let me go back to that for a minute. To get a 1-star level, you have to be below an index of 40. So if you're below 40, you'll be a TSI. But it has to be in achievement for English, achievement for math, growth for English, and growth for math. The index is not 40 for that. There's another index for it. It's 0.83 for ELA and below 0.81 for math. So you have to have it in 4 categories. So in a minute I'm going to explain more about that. But then in addition to that, if you go to the next grouping, you have another category called ATSI, which is Additional Targeted Support and Improvement. It's really a subgroup of the first one, and that means that those scores were basically even lower. So the cut scores for those would be an index under 35 for ELA and 27 for math. Everybody with me so far? All right, good. So this shows you what has happened in the state with the amount of schools that had one or more subgroups identified. So there's quite a few schools in that category. And if this happens for 4 consecutive years, the school will be known as a school that needs comprehensive support and improvement. So when this happened years ago, I remember we had it way back when with one of our schools. We had to create a plan, and within a year, that school came out of that category due to the work that they did. But I imagine that's what will happen with this. There'll be a need for a plan, and you have to follow that plan and meet with certain people, etc. So, but that's after 4 years, and in the meantime, the last piece on the last sentence on this says this kind of identification is new in 2018. So RIDE's going to analyze the trends and see if this is what they're going to keep with, basically. Oops. So these are our schools that are in the TSI. We have Fishing Cove, Forest Park, Hamilton, and Stony Lane. And the reason for it is because of the category of achievement, and it's in one subgroup, and that subgroup is the students with disabilities. Now, what happened with the elementary schools, because you start to look at the middle schools and say, well, why weren't the middle schools or even the high school? There's definitely subgroups there, and some of them did not perform that well. What happened with them? So remember I was saying that you have to have the 4 categories. So it's achievement in math, achievement in ELA, growth in ELA, and growth in math. You have to have all 4 of those, below in all 4 of those, in order to hit this. And what happened with the elementary schools is opposite to the secondary schools. The elementary schools did not have numbers, an N number high enough, which had to be 20. Did not have an N number high enough to help them with growth. So it was an NA for growth. So instead of them being absolved from it, they were penalized because their achievement was lower than the index that I mentioned, which was 40. But they didn't have the other 2 categories to pull them up for growth. The secondary schools did have those enough growth. All of our schools had high growth, but we didn't have enough numbers for the elementary school. And the reason for that is that you only have 4th and 5th grade that were able to have growth because the 3rd graders were taking a state assessment for the first time. So you don't have that. However, for going forward for next year, if you have a subgroup that has less than 20, so less than 20 is, let me say, from 10 to 19 is reportable, so we have data on it, but for accountability, you have to have 20. And so if you don't have that in a subgroup, they're going to take a weighted average of this year and next year. And so in some categories where people didn't have enough for it to count, it will count next year. So some of those ratings may go down, and that will be the reason for it. Okay. Quinnesset was okay with their students with disabilities because they actually did have enough students, and their growth was good. So they did not get in a penalty for students with disabilities. However, they have a lot of English language learners, and they did not have good achievement with the English language learner subgroup. And then in the other category, which is a little worse, we have students with disabilities. Again, was the reasoning for it. And once again, they did not have the growth factor to help them and to help them escape from this label. So what has happened with them in this case is that their scores were just below the 35 for ELA and the 27 for math. And that 35 and 27 comes from the lowest, what they did was take the lowest 5% of performance in the state, those schools, and did an average, and that's how they came up with those numbers. So, questions? Oh, before I do questions, I want to tell you, in the folder, there are, I think, some helpful pieces of information. You have a flyer that's just nice, easy information for people to share. So there's a nice flyer to explain things to families, for example, parents that may be coming in for meetings, etc. And then we have these here show you exactly where the schools fell on each of the categories. But I also included our district report because I think it's more helpful than, these will give you a general idea, but this is more helpful in the sense that it shows you exactly, on every page in every category, it has all of the schools listed. So you can see exactly where the index fell and how many points, like where they were in relation, like were they close to having 2 points, were they close to getting to 3 points, how close are they on the cut scores. And then on the very last one, I thought Mr. Jones might be particularly interested in this one. The last page shows where our graduates have gone following year. Okay. Questions?
I do have some questions. So, thanks, Dr. Humbert. I don't know if the word simple and looking in the audience, whether that translates. Where to start? So, and I know you're just the messenger on some of this. My first concern, so you talk about the subgroups with an N of 20. So benchmarking and parents looking at this going 5, 4. So you have, for example, single school charters that are districts that will never get N's of 20s. And so they never face the same kind of penalty we faced with some of these subgroups.
Well, they will next year unless they have less than 20 teachers.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's one issue. But then related to that point is going, these are annual assessments, but the state's going to use prior year data to carry forward. It's like sort of telling these students, we're going to grade you on your 12th grade English, but because we don't think you got enough assessment in 12th grade, we're going to pull some of your 11th grade scores, which has no bearing then on whether you've gained some proficiency because you're using a static prior year benchmark. I'm kind of concerned that the state is using, this to correct the subgroup low N number by pulling in prior year data.
That's a concern.
Yeah. On the high school stuff.
Except I will say though, using 2 years of data, 2 years of data, I'm not talking about the subgroups now, but for the all students population, you could argue that it stabilizes the data a little bit.
Right. So the question is, why don't you do 2 year increments for evaluations, right? Why don't you rate schools every 2 years instead of every 1 year, right? I mean, that's my concern is going, we're telling parents these are annual report cards, but some of the tools used are not annual. I know you're the messenger. I just, Phil, when you take some of these things with your group, I'm concerned on the, well, you're both the same, Marissa. I'm concerned on the high school ratings going forward. So graduate proficiency measures how high school graduates by they perform a math and ELA test. I'm assuming that's the PSAT, SAT?
It could be the PSAT or the SAT. It could also be, no, it couldn't be. For them, it would be those two.
Right. So we're saying a graduate.
Well, it could be an alternate assessment or
Correct, right.
or an access as well.
Yes,
If
but
they
that's,
showed proficiency with an access, that could count.
yes, but that's a relatively low end compared to the bulk of the students are gonna be,
Yeah, majority will.
the majority will be
yep.
the PSAT, SAT.
Mhm.
So.
But they could get proficiency on either of those.
Right, but my concern again is going, the language that says how prepared high school graduates are by a test they take in 10th and 11th grade,
Mhm.
which doesn't reflect that there could be growth between 10th, 11th to 12th grade by the time they graduate, which to me is a more accurate, it's sort of going, how good is your high school at proficiency at a midpoint, as opposed to saying graduate. So I'm concerned the language isn't real, unless the state's gonna move to a proficiency test as a requirement for graduation, it's kind of a misleading
That might happen.
indicator.
That
Well,
might
but,
happen.
right, but my point is going again, we haven't implemented this, but I'm concerned about, and for North Kingstown High School, this is, we have great scores, but I'm just concerned as a general person looking at this going, are we really holding accountability for what we measure with what we're saying? Because now I add, for example, post-secondary success. So prioritizes college credits, and then we add what the commissioner's seal is, which I don't know if that's been fully developed.
Right.
But it's again going, PSAT, SAT are college prep things. Some of these seals may or may not be career prep, but unless they're required for graduation, again, we're penalizing schools whose students don't choose to go get those. I'm just concerned that the whole thing, other than graduation, is fraught with a lot of methodological problems that are going to skew ratings.
Right, and they're not worked out yet either
Yeah,
in those, for
and-
either of those categories.
Right, and so I guess I would say is, so, as advocates with the Superintendent's Association is, if we're gonna sell these as going 5-star means something and 4-star means something, I'm back to that commercial where you kind of, we're laughing about it, but, the commercials that are airing now, that you go, oh, this brake shop, it's just okay, your doctor's just okay. Well, for some of these schools, for 95% of the students, they're a 5-star school. But the rating reflects that. Now, it's important if you're perhaps have a child who's in that subgroup. That's great, and I think there's some value to that. But I think there's some misleading components to this that the simple rating hides. And I think that's something that, we need to advocate with RIDE to go, everything's iterative. I just have some real concerns about how these are developed. And again, for North Kingstown, the ratings are pretty good, but, the system gives and the system takes with some of these methodological issues, so.
Piggyback on this point?
Dr. Shea?
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I agree with you on that point. And Dr. Humbert, thank you for that presentation. I've sat through this about 3 or 4 times now, and I am totally impressed by how much you can clarify all of this.
Thank you.
There's a lot of information here. I appreciate the parents tonight for coming on out and to hear this. There's so much more to it than a few stars, one way or another. We have some great schools in North Kingstown. In my opinion, they're all 5-star schools. They do amazing work. And, one case in point that was mentioned, Hamilton Elementary this year happened to be the 2nd highest performing elementary school in the state. They're not a 5-star school because of a small subgroup. And I get that it's important to focus on every student and every subgroup and to make sure, we're doing what we need to do, and we will. But I think the star, using stars to make that rating really, truly oversimplifies things and can hide some things. So it's really important that we have someone to explain to us, everything that goes into it. It's really important not to jump to conclusions about these ratings, and that if you have questions, please give us a call. I can't help you, but I know Dr. Humbert will be very happy to help you. And, you know, just to give an explanation of it, and I think that when people really dig into the data that we're receiving, they will be very impressed with what they learn about our schools, so.
Any other questions?
I just have a quick question. You said the TSI and the ATSI are gonna require a plan or something,
Well,
you don't know
in
yet?
4 years, if
In
somebody,
4 years.
if
it will
somebody
require
stays at that rating for 4 years,
Uh-huh.
then they are going to fall into that comprehensive, I forget what, support and intervention. And my past experience with that, when we had a school that was in the lowest category
Mhm.
and fell into a label like that, we had to create a plan with the school. And that school created a plan and got out of that label and
Right.
went on to become a blue ribbon school,
So for right now, you don't have to.
So
do
there's
anything.
no
No,
intervention
not right
required based on this one?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
But based on the discrepancy between the elementary schools, is there like a plan to align some of the curriculum, or how is that being looked at from the administration?
Well, the schools right now, the principals are all doing an overview of the full accountability system with the staff. But with the RICAS results especially, it's an item analysis right now. So they're going in and seeing if we have data on exactly how every school and every student did on several questions.
Individual components of it.
Yeah, so that's what we're looking at now.
Mr. Gibbs?
Yeah, and related to that, I mean, we applaud the state for looking at things like student absenteeism. But again, unless you're gonna put some teeth to the truancy laws, right? The law says parents can be actually put in jail, but nobody does. You can be fined up to $500. Do you know of any instances where
Not
they
in the
are?
last 10 or 15
Right.
years.
And so my point is going, if you think something's important enough to measure it, then help the people who have to enforce it, enforce it. I mean, it's, again, students are absentee for a lot of different reasons, some valid, some not. The not valid reasons where the school doesn't have, other than pointing it out, but yet gets penalized for it. I think the state needs to go, if student absenteeism is a critical thing, then give some teeth to enforcing the law that's on the books.
Any other questions? Again, I just want to thank you for a very detailed presentation on a very detailed topic, and I thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Yeah, well,
Yes,
Sorry,
well,
are questions allowed from?
not, unfortunately, not directly at a meeting. It's not that I want to cut you off, it's just that there are rules as to, how agenda works. We do have a public comment period in a moment where you can speak. We wouldn't answer questions, but you're welcome to reach out to Dr. Humbert or Dr. Auger at any time, and they can answer a question for you. I'm sorry, it's just the
Or she can
way.
raise the question.
You could, right, at public comment,
Right.
yeah, so at public comment, you can mention your question, and then, we can take that into account. But unfortunately, it's just the way the rules of, open meetings have been for it.
We
On
have
to
two quick
presentations, recognitions, yep.
Yes.
Okay, so we had Miss Mason's US 2 honors classes submitted essays to the VFW's essay contest, and the theme this year was Why My Vote Matters. So 4 of the high school students were voted winners by the VFW Post, and they were Jacqueline Emby, Matteo Garcia, Lauren Fox, and Cameron Tuttle. And Cameron was going to be moving on to compete at the state level. Then we had our robotics squads. So we had the DMS Default Dragons advance to the state championship at Roger Williams. Bigger news is that for the first time in the history of Davisville Middle School robotics, they won the coveted award of Best Project. Then at the first Tech Challenge qualifier, North Robotics sent 2 of its 5 teams. We do have 5 teams, 4 at the high school and 1 at Whitford that compete at this level. And the Gonk Squad, which is primarily juniors, took home the top award for their engineering notebook. And the Powell Rangers, our primarily senior team, took 2nd place for design and 3rd place in the Inspire Award, which is the top award overall. So both teams qualified for the state championships. They're going to be held on February 9th. And the other teams, 3 teams, will attempt to qualify at the end of this month. So our thanks to Mr. Powell and Mrs. Shields for their work with that. And just a reminder that we have Democracy Night tomorrow night.
Yep, I was about to mention that. If people aren't familiar with that, it's a component of our democracy class at the high school. It's at 6:30 at the high school tomorrow night. It's open to the public, and the students put on, the junior class members of the current class put on their presentation on an issue that they feel needs to be changed, and they advocate for that change as a lesson in how democracy works. So it's a great program if you can drop in the high school and check it out. Okay, next would be citizens' comments. I have one person who signed up, but anyone can go after that. Looks like Claire Dart. So if you could please limit your comments to 3 minutes, and please state your name and address, please.
All right. Hi, I'm Claire Dart, and I'm here to address, and this is actually for my democracy project. I'm a junior at North Kingstown High School, and I'm here to comment on how I believe an additional school psychiatrist should be hired at the high school. We only have one for the 1,500 students that go to our school, and it's just, according to the National Association of School Psychiatrists, there should be one for every 500 to 700 students, so clearly we need to do some work there and making sure we cover all of those students. And as a student that struggled with mental illness myself, this project is especially important to me. In an anonymous survey that I sent out to my peers, 66% or 2/3 of the students that responded said that mental health had affected their schoolwork. I'm sure you guys are aware of the 2 suicides that have happened these past 2 years, so I trust this is very important to you guys as well. So I'm hoping that maybe this could be considered in the budget planning to hire another school psychiatrist. I know I talked to Dr. Auger about this through a letter, and I hope to see you guys at Democracy Night. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. That's the only person who's signed up, but anyone else is welcome to, or it's going to be a long meeting. Catch us after the meeting, or give us a call. Yep, just again, come to the microphone, state your name and address, please.
Hi, I'm Pam Ong. I live at 101 Taft Street in Saunderstown. And my daughter's a senior on the sailing team, and I just want to express my support for the funding, the proposed funding for the sailing team. My daughter's had a great experience. She started off freshman year, not ever having sailed before, and has had a great experience, and the team has done really well, and she's planning to sail in college now. So it's a great program, and I really support the funding. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Anyone else who'd like to speak? Okay. Conclude citizens' comments. Next item on the agenda would be superintendent's report. Dr. Auger?
Yes, thank you. So I kind of left this as a placeholder to address any further concerns about the accountability report. Again, thank you for that. There was one question that came to me, and I think it's worth commenting on through one of the schools, and someone noticed in looking at the data that RIDE supplies that our elementary schools are listed for having different levels of per pupil spending, and that is true, but again you really need to dig deeply into the data. For instance, Stony Lane is listed for less spending per pupil than some of our other schools, but two of our schools have major all-district special education programs that are factored in. Those are very expensive programs. So when you do the per pupil expenditure after all of that, it comes out looking very different from school to school. So depending on the types of programming that happens in the school, and again, many of these are programs that take on kids from the whole district. They just happen to be located at a certain place. It can really throw that number off. So just another point in terms of, and another mention, that if anyone should have any questions about how our schools are doing or their reading of our accountability report, more than happy to take an email from you or have you come on in and we'll walk you through the whole program so you know what you need to know. Thank you.
Thank you. So next we've reached the routine items. So if I could please have a motion to seal the executive session minutes of January 15th, 2019.
So moved.
Motion Ms. Hoskins, second Mr. Jones. We only have one Mr. Jones this evening, which makes it a little easier. And all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. And I can disclose that no votes were taken in the executive session this evening. With respect to the consent agenda, I'm going to exempt items E6 and E7. Are there any other members like to exempt any items from the consent agenda?
D1.
D1. Okay, any others? Then I would ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda items with the exception of D1, E6, and E7.
So moved.
I have a motion, Ms. Hoskins, second, Mr. Jones. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimously. So the first exempted item was D1, Ms. Hildebrand?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you can
Little
tell us a little bit more about that. Is
elaboration.
that,
Well, Wickford Middle School is 85 years old,
right,
and there are areas that are contained asbestos, and we have them checked a couple of times a year. Any other schools that have any of the contained asbestos, DMS does as well. But Wickford Middle School, with as old as it is, it has been recommended to us by our expert, John Carbone from Vortex, that we do a pretty big abatement in the cafeteria area. So there's no harm now. What we do now is we put several coats of floor polish on the cafeteria area. The custodial company keeps on top of that, and our guys walk through there every week to make sure aren't areas of chipping or more cracking. But we can't wait any longer. We talk about the age of the school, and the school just keeps getting older. We are going to have to put massive, massive money into Wickford Middle School or figure something else out. We can't wait anymore. So this is the start of it. Actually, we had looked at possibly doing the work over April break. The timeframe's just too tight, so we did talk to Mr. Carbone, and he's going to schedule, I'm coming to you a little bit early for the approval, because he really needs to schedule his guys so that he can get in there as soon as school ends, but we have to do it.
so this is just the first area you anticipate more?
Yeah, there are not any other areas right now that are on his radar that are becoming more of an issue, that he doesn't want to wait any longer, but that doesn't mean that there won't be.
Any other questions or further discussion?
Motion to approve D1.
I have a motion to approve D1. Do I have a second? Second. Ms. Hoskins. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Number E6, I'm going to make a motion to approve item E6 with the addition of the name of Kimberly Kilcline, which is a late addition to the agenda. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second from Mr. Jones. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. And I'm going to make a motion to table E7.
You're removing it.
Motion to remove E7, sorry. We don't need to take it up again. So, motion to remove it. Second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
So skip E7. That concludes the consent agenda. Next item is the approval of the 2019-2020 Program of Studies. Dr. Ajay, you want to
So
make some
we
comments?
presented this to you at our last meeting. The only difference from last meeting, we mentioned to you that we would be looking at 6 credits, mandatory in the senior year as opposed to 7, and that has been corrected or changed on the Program of Studies that you now in front of you. Other than that, the program is very exactly as Dr. Morse presented.
Any questions? Well, actually, I'd first ask for a motion to approve the item.
So moved.
Motion Ms. Hildebrand, do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Jones, do you have a second? Any discussion on the Program of Studies? I know we talked about it a bit last time as well. No.
Well, again, it's always a rigorous thing, so I appreciate the
Thank you for the
superintendent and the administration and the high school leadership and team for constantly working this. We had discussion, which I think the superintendent echoed yesterday, and items, discussion at the state level about financial literacy. There's a lawsuit currently at the state about civics. And there's a recommendation, at least from the Senate's Labor Force Task Force, about a mandatory year of computer science. So I believe we've had discussions with the administration that over the next year, they're going to look at looking at those as specific topics as we work on the next year program of study. So I appreciate the administration taking those on. I think we have some robust, obviously, especially in civics with our democracy and other things, but getting out in front of maybe being mandated by the state, that we're out in front of that for next year.
Our primary obstacle right now is we changed the emerging tech so that's not the only computer science or technology required course. We opened up a lot of courses to fulfill that requirement. The block we're going to run into is capacity, teaching capacity,
Right.
because there aren't a lot of teachers out there qualified to teach the computer science. So that's where we're going to be looking to grow. And we have some teachers going to training this summer to add some more Project Lead the Way courses in the computer science. So that's our big challenge. And the financial literacy, we're looking to see how the emerging tech numbers shift, because those are the same teachers that would be teaching the financial literacy. So as we see how one impacts the other, we'll gear up towards getting the financial literacies.
No, I agree, thank you. I just think we should also investigate alternate pathways to achieve proficiency as well, so.
We're going to need to.
Right, because I
Right.
sometimes think the state thinks about mandates ahead of the capability to actually implement them at the
Exactly.
user level, so. But again, appreciate the administration taking that on over the next 9 months to a year.
Okay, any other questions or comments? So we have a motion and a second on that item. Then I'll ask all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you again. Next, we have item G, which is an approval of minibus disposals. I'll ask for a motion to approve that item for discussion.
So,
Motion?
second.
Ms. Huskins, second Ms. Hildebrand. Any discussion on that?
Just how many miles
I
are
looked
on
at the
those?
mileage, if you want to
Just-
maybe
just
make a
let
note of
the-
those.
Just to let the citizens know how
Oh,
much we
okay.
run that into
Let
the
me,
ground.
I don't think I have it up in front of
Oh, I
me.
can
What
have it.
page was it?
Close to 300,000.
Exactly, there's 200 and some thousand, two of them are. Yeah, it's not for lack of use.
So, yeah, we're
One
putting
has 318, one
Yep.
has 260, and one has 281,000.
branding is, you know.
A lot of life left there.
All right.
So the blue book value on it.
And so in the disposal, you're putting it out to bid for anybody who, whatever.
Exactly. If we're lucky, somebody will come and drag it away. That's what we're hoping for.
It shows that make it into a mini house, right?
Yeah.
Small house.
Yeah, we'll take it
Never
to
know.
Nicaragua, right?
Right, my sister will take it. Okay, so, any other discussion on that item? Then all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Next, we have the school committee approval of Forest Park proposed playground upgrades. If I could ask for a motion to approve that item.
So moved.
I have a motion Ms. Hoskins,
Second.
second Ms. Hildebrand. Any discussion on that?
Just a quick question, Phil. That's going on existing playground space? Just want to
Yes.
avoid the issue of putting something in new space.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
And I'll,
Never heard that it's going on new space.
No, but I
Yeah,
just want to make
okay.
sure, because
Yeah,
I
we'll
looked at the thing,
double
but I
check
didn't
on
see
that,
the.
You're right, in the packet, the exact spot of the equipment wasn't
Right.
mapped out,
Yeah.
but it's going in the
Yeah.
existing playground.
Okay.
yeah,
That's
they're
my
just,
understanding.
just trying to add a few pieces over there.
Okay, so we have a motion. Any other discussion or questions? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Sorry? Yep, okay, let me do first. So next item is the North Kingston High School sailing team configuration. If I could start by having a motion to approve. I have a motion, Ms. Hoskins, second Ms. Hildebrand, and Dr. G, you have some comments to this.
So, over the last year or two, we've noticed that our sailing team has been configured very differently from how our other teams have worked. It was one of those situations where years ago, parents came forward saying, we'd like to kind of fund this on our own and take it, and there was always kind of this question about, kind of who's running the program and where's the oversight, and it was kind of inconsistent with you know, other NK sports. So this proposal does not really hire anybody right now, but what it does is gets your approval to have this as a spring sport only. And it would include now hiring an assistant coach. And all oversight would be consistent with the Rhode Island Interscholastic League, even though it is not an interscholastic league sport, but we would treat it that way in terms of, you know, how our players participate and the kinds of GPA they would need to, you know, be on the team, that sort of thing. And it'd be consistent with all the other NK teams. So we feel it's very important to have an assistant coach. You know, you're dealing with kids out on the water. There is some times where there's a coach that should be kind of on the land and one out with the kids on the water. To have just one person when kids can be that far apart can be, you know, a real liability issue. So we feel like this is the way to do it right, and we want to move forward with that as a program.
Any questions or comments?
And we are the skippers, by the way, so sailing is very important.
We had a motion and a second on that item, so all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? It passes unanimously. One of the coaches has to wear the raincoat and outfit.
All right, I'll let them know that.
Next is the school committee approval of resolution, which is the RIDE school transportation categorical funding. If I could ask for a motion to approve.
So,
I have a motion
Second.
and a second, Mr. Jones. Any discussion? Mr. Jones, I know you
Yeah, I
drafted
just
it
for
in,
the
and
public
talked about it last
consumption,
night a bit at the town
so
council.
just in case the audience or community members aren't fully aware, state law requires school districts such as North Kingstown to provide transportation to certain out of district private schools. For example, to Prout or Monsignor Clark, among others, are in our area. This is not debating that, it's state law. We have to do that in textbooks. But the state law also gave the ability for districts to receive reimbursement for, I believe it's excessive costs, not quite sure what that means, but excessive costs associated with that. But the wording in state law limited that reimbursements only to districts who participated in the statewide system. I believe the intent was to prevent districts just buying individual buses to satisfy that when there's a statewide. I don't think it took into account districts like North Kingstown, which has a very efficient, where we squeeze every bit of transportation out of the system we have. So we are not adding new transportation capabilities to meet this requirement, yet we are not able to get reimbursed like, for example, South Kingston gets over $100,000. And they're basically busing kids to the same out-of-district schools that we are. This is a request to the General Assembly to fix that inequity. If the state's going to mandate public school districts do that and they're going to offer reimbursement, they should offer it to everyone who has to do it, regardless of the method used.
Any questions?
Can you describe the process of a resolution? So this goes to the General Assembly, and then what?
And we hope someone sponsors a bill that amends the law to enable, basically what we're hoping is it strikes out the language that says only in the statewide system.
And a little more specific, so last night the town council had a meeting at which they invited the legislative delegation representing North Kingstown. Mr. Jones, myself, and Dr. Auger attended as well and spoke briefly to the town council and the representatives that were in attendance. The idea is that by making a resolution like this, the school committee is signaling to the legislature as a whole and our legislators in particular that these are items that we would like them to take a look at. Then they would, as part of being our representatives, advocate for the change at the General Assembly. Our track record of getting these things actually passed is not always good, but we do what we can. There are a number of issues we've brought up in the past that we continue to support, some of which came up last night, some of the resolutions with regards to some of the way that charter schools are handled, representation on charter school boards we've visited in the past, and we, I think, continue to support those pieces of legislation to the extent that we can get them, through the General Assembly. But that's the idea. And did we need to make any changes to it? I know there was a question, this doesn't have the language as to who it goes to, so do we need to change
I think we
anything?
fixed
Or
it.
is it all fixed now? The
Standard
language is to
distribution.
standard distribution, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
I'll work
okay.
with Dr. Ajay and Mr.
Perfect.
Jones to determine who it should go to.
Great, I just remember there was a question on that. So we have a motion and a second on the transportation resolution. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Next is item K, which is with respect to state education aid funding formula stabilization. This one is very specific to our current budget discussion that we're going to be getting to shortly with respect to looking for some stability from the legislature on that. And Mr. Jones, you want to speak to this
I
one as
will.
well?
So while the last resolution, teeny tiny change, which we would hope they would think, this is a statewide issue which we are lending our voice to. Essentially, we are in year 8, I think, Mary,
Yes.
of the funding formula. And the funding formula provides state funding to communities based on a generic factor, well, I shouldn't say that, a initial sum plus some categorical areas such as the transportation, special ed. This focuses on that main funding stream. It is based on a formula which takes into account enrollment, your K through 6 low-income population, and then mixes in things about your community property valuations and comparable sales and household income as determined by the American Community Survey. One of the issues is, since some of that data is set by formula and some of it's backward-looking, for example, the income and the property valuations are from 3 years ago, any swing in a year has started now that the formula is in sort of the final years, led to large variations. And we went through this last year where North Kingstown was told the last 3 years we were getting a $1.5 million cut, which is about 15% of our state aid. Last year we did get cuts, 600 something thousand, and then after the fact, just to add a little more paper cuts, they cut us another 60,000 after the fact.
And we were told to expect it again
And we're
this
told
year.
to expect it again this year because, again, the formula has backward-looking data that gets replugged in. Now it's maybe not so bad, but the larger point, I think, is if you're trying to plan some long-term educational stability, and from a taxpayer's perspective, since the school budget's the largest component of the town tax levy for us, you're trying to give the town council and the citizens some predictability about their property tax requirements. It is very difficult to have these wild swings, especially when there's also legislation that requires localities to not only provide a certain maintenance of effort, but caps their ability to raise that revenue. There's no such corresponding rule at the state level. What this resolution essentially says to do is, since the funding formula is winding up in the next few years, as hopefully the General Assembly and the governor relooks at these things, to basically stabilize it for that period so communities don't go through these wild variations. And while it was a big toll for us, there's examples like Smithfield that got $1.5 million bonus, not the right word, but $1.5 million increase. So they didn't raise property taxes. This year they're getting a $1.5 million cut, and now they're looking at a tax increase that's beyond their capacity to do. This, I think, tells the state to go, please eliminate that year-to-year variability, at least for now, because we can't program long-term initiatives if every year we might have to cut, add, etc.
And this was mentioned briefly, but in one of the items with this that it sort of dovetails the maintenance of effort. The maintenance of effort means is that when the town appropriates funds for the school department last year, they cannot give us less the following year unless there's a decrease in enrollment. If we lose a whole bunch of students, then we can presumably make up some reduction due to the lack of students. But other than that, they have to essentially, and vastly oversimplify it, have to give us what they gave us the year before. This asks the state to essentially do the same thing, that with the state aid, they can reallocate it as needed, but we ask that they not decrease it year over year, because we still have to, you know, unless there's a reduction in students, because we still need to teach the same number of students, we still need to provide the same programs. It's just impossible to budget the way it's working right now. Any other questions or comments?
Is there any opportunity to join with other school districts that are dealing with this?
So what we're hoping with this is,
Yeah.
we send this resolution because we think it's applicable statewide to
Mhm.
other municipalities and school, and then hopefully they,
Maybe
Chime
jump on
in.
the bandwagon.
Yeah, okay.
So we had a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. So, next item on the agenda, we pulled L, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
Okay.
a motion to, remove item L, we decided to hold off on that one.
so moved.
Motion, do I have a second?
Second.
A second. All those in favor of removing that item? Aye. Any opposed? So, L we're gonna skip. Unfinished business. 2018-19 school budget. Nothing to report on that. 2019-20 school budget, nothing, right?
So we have plenty of that.
This is the beginnings of our serious budget discussions, and Mrs. King, just to remind the committee, we must approve.
Yes, so we have 3 meetings. That meeting on February 19th, we need to approve the budget that will be sent, it will now then be called the North Kingstown School Committee budget, to the town manager, because I need to have it to him by that Monday, the 25th. So Tuesday night's our meeting, Monday he needs to have it, he disseminates it to the town council. So we have to approve it that night.
And just a quick review, being new, and I'll do it again when Mr. Jones, he couldn't make it this evening, but when he's here again. So this is the superintendent's proposed budget. We take this budget, we review it, ask questions of Mrs. King, Dr. Ajay, Dr. Humbert, any administration people that you might have questions on particular items. We always ask that if there are any items that you would like to propose to make changes to, that you please give some advance notice to Mrs. King. When we get to that final meeting date, we need to approve a bottom line dollar number,
Right.
okay? And so what that means is that if you suddenly, at the very last meeting when we're approving the budget, say, well, what if we remove this? Mrs. King needs to be able to actually know what the dollar effect of that's going to be. So we ask that you give her some advance notice. You know, you're welcome to propose anything that you'd like, but at least that way she can tell you what the financial impact would be of the change that you're proposing, whether it's up or down.
We can have some estimates and stuff, but one year we had a group that said, you know, we're gonna have Dr. Ojay cut X percentage or whatever. You can do that, but you have to vote on a number. You have to cut that percentage right there at that meeting and vote on a final absolute number.
Yep. And then from there, once we've approved that budget, that then goes to the town council. The town council decides how much money they're actually going to give us, which tends to be less than the amount we asked for. And then we need to revisit our budget to rebalance it with the amount of money we actually have, and that will happen a little later on. And there's a whole lot, and a public hearing in between all that, but that's the quick version. So, but this is the real crunch time, so this is our first look at it.
Yep.
Then we've, you know, got to dig deep into that, meet, talk, ask, and then off we go, okay? And Dr. Ajay, I know you have some things you want to say about it.
I do. So, thank you, Mr. Glassball. And to get things started, if anyone out in TV land or in the audience tonight is interested in seeing a real thorough background on our budget process and the factors that go into our budgeting, every year, and this year included, December 17th, there was a joint meeting of the school committee and the town council, and Mrs. King and I spent the better part of 45 minutes, I guess, going through a lot of details on where the money goes in the district and the kinds of challenges that we face on a regular basis in making ends meet. So my proposal to the school committee for this year going forward is for a budget of $67,916,000 and change. And that is a $2.4 million increase over last year. Now, that money, just to make sure everyone understands where all this is coming from, what that actually, that's overall, it's a 3.7% increase overall. But the part that we are asking the town about is for the town's allocation. Out of that 67 million, we're looking for 54.164 million to come from the town. And that is a little over $2 million in an increase, and that is 4% increase for town funding to the school department. The rest of the funding for the district, we mentioned state aid, and we didn't get any significant. We're projecting to go down in state aid, but not nearly by this, $600,000 that we were hit with last year. That's about another $10 million for us. Medicaid is some revenue of about $400,000, and the other big number that I just want people to be aware of is that in tuitions that we have from other LEAs, that plays into $3.2 million of our overall budget. $3.2 million. And you think about the request we're giving to the town is for 4%, and that comes up to $2 million. That means we're over 6% of our budget is tuitions from other LEAs, which basically means the tuition money that we receive for students from Jamestown to come to North Kingstown, that is 1.6 million of that number. The other number, which is really astonishing considering how relatively new this is the career and tech programming that we have at the high school. That we are projecting to bring in $1.5 million or more, all by itself. Just that is 3% of our budget. If we didn't have that revenue, we would really be in tough shape at the moment, not to be relying on that. So I just think it's an important piece that we need to be reminded of, that these programs are doing a lot of good for our kids. They're doing good for kids from neighboring communities, and they're really helping us in all sorts of ways to when we make the bottom line, and we can make a lot of other programming happen, whether it's career and tech oriented or not. So so I mentioned where the funding comes from. The other sources are pretty much flat items. With the expenses, we need to be mindful that we're going into a negotiation year. So there's some left to be negotiated in terms of how our negotiations will go with our teachers union, and that is scheduled to start in February. Some of the ads that I'm looking to put together with, not much of this 4%. A lot of the 4% is just regular year-to-year movement of different items like healthcare and salaries and that sort of thing. But we're looking to add a nurse at the high school. Right now we have one nurse for 1,400 students. Similar to the recommendation earlier about the school psychologist, I know the recommendation that I would give is for a much better ratio than that, and it really is a growing job every year, it seems, with the number of kids who need nurses' attention in the course of a day. And we're hoping to add a nurse to our ranks at the high school. We would be looking for an additional assistant principal. That assistant principal would be shared amongst the 5 elementary schools. Right now we have assistant principals at our middle school and our high school, obviously, but none at all for our elementary school. This will help us to kind of build, on our group of capable people ready to take on that job when needed, but also it will give much needed assistance to our principals, particularly on days where they are heavy on meetings. They can line up, they have certain days of the week, each school has one, where the principal can be in her office every day, every minute of that day, one meeting stacked on top of another. And that means they're not really giving the rest of the school a lot of attention. They're not in classrooms, they're not in the cafeteria, they're not interacting with anyone else in the community. And So I think it would be helpful on those days in particular to have that assistant principal take on some of that load so they could still, get to those other responsibilities that they have. This is something I've been hoping to do for quite a while. If we have kindergarten enrollment similar to last year, you remember we were really kind of surprised to find out that particularly at Forest Park and at Stony Lane, we had far more kindergarten students than we had expected, even in the month of May. Between May and August, there was a shift of about 40 to 50 students that we just did not even know were coming. That's what happens with kindergarten. If we continue on that trend, we are definitely going to need another kindergarten teacher district-wide this year, maybe more than one, and more than likely, one additional teacher at the elementary level. This also includes an addition of half an hour for 10 of our TAs. Many of our TAs have 6-hour days that they're assigned to. We would like an additional 10, so 2 more at each elementary school to have an extra half an hour on their day. That doesn't sound like a lot, but when you put it all together over the course of the year, it's quite a bit of money. And that allows for those folks to help, bell to bell, and when the kids are getting off to when the kids are getting back on the bus. Whereas right now, there's a lot of maneuvering that has to happen to make sure we have the right supervision when it's needed. This budget, as many of you, if not all of you know, we currently, have Chromebooks for every student, and that program of having those Chromebooks is roughly a $350,000 item to the district every year. We have been using fund balance money that is left over after the year, and if we haven't spent it all, that money goes into a pot, and we use that money to have been making these purchases for the last few years. We would like to incorporate that into the regular general fund budget, and I'd like to do that in 2 steps. This would be the first step, so $175,000 would go toward setting this up as a regular general fund item. So it would then be included in next year's request when we say, we need so many percentage increase on the budget. That item is already in there. The Chromebooks are already being paid for in that money already. This would include an additional grade for the Dreambox and Bridges online academic support programs. They have been very popular with our educators and with parents, and we'd like to see that grow. Few areas of concern that we have. There are always areas of concern. This does not include additional money on top of the bond money to help with some items for the athletic complex. We would need to find a way to include an extra $100,000 for certain kinds of equipment. Some of that may be something that we could work with the boosters on, but that's an unknown at the moment. Statewide busing is a real problem. We talked about ESSA requirements earlier in the meeting, and if a student from North Kingstown has problems with their family, and DCYF intervention needs to happen, and suddenly that student is no longer an NK but is residing with an extended family member or in a foster home in another community, the ESSA requirements are that we would have a hearing about that student and determine what's the best place for them to come to school. In a lot of cases, that's for the school that they have been in. That's the school family anyway, that they're familiar with. And that may mean a long bus ride back to North Kingstown to make that happen. Could be from anywhere else in the state. The issue for school departments, NK included, is that we have to pick up the tab for that. And that's a very big proposition for some of these bus rides. A bus going, could go into any part of the state, as far away as Woonsocket, for instance, and that's to get one student. So you can imagine the price that could go with that. So the point in budgeting is that we don't know for sure how many students we're going to be talking about next year that this applies to. So it's really difficult to budget for it. Special education is always a wild card. Students move in and move out of the district. They don't announce a year ahead of time if they're moving into the district, and they may come with an exorbitant set of needs over, special needs. And sometimes that can be pretty expensive. For instance, if someone moves into the district and they need a placement at a place like Meeting Street School, that would be a tuition upwards of $100,000 that we had not been planning for. So we say this quite a bit, but every year that we need to be mindful that of setting aside funding so that we can cover those kinds of expenses should they come at us. There is a strong likelihood that we will need additional FTEs at the high school, or at least portions or fractions of FTEs to accommodate the growing career and tech numbers. As I mentioned, we're bringing in a lot of revenue for career and tech, and that is growing, but that's still a number that's kind of in play. And so we're going to know later in the spring and into the summer exactly what we're going to need for not only career and tech staff to teach those students. We're confident that we have the numbers that we require there, but all of those students also take English, math, social studies, science, and other electives, and sometimes that may trip some of those numbers, so you need an extra section of math or an extra section of science to accommodate the growing numbers of students. So that's something we're still looking at. Healthcare, we estimated a 5% increase. Dental, we estimated a 3% increase, but we do not have answers on those questions until February and March. So those are numbers that we may only get after we send a request to the town, which is always a problem. Just for the sake of everyone's knowledge, when you put together a budget like this, last year when we had the state aid massive cut on top of this, we got from the town almost a 4% increase. But because of the state aid problem, we still needed to cut back on, I think it ended up somewhere around $750,000 worth of cuts. A lot of staff went away last year. But things we just didn't even talk about. And we should be talking about this, but we can't because it's above 4%. We don't have any additional buses here. We've talked from time to time about affecting school start times by increasing buses in the district. There are no extra buses in this budget. There are no significant equipment upgrades for, and some of the requests we've gotten from our career tech programs, which are 5 years old now, the earliest ones, and some of our science programs require a lot of equipment that needs to be replaced on a regular basis. We would not be able to do much, if any, of that this year. This will be something we address next year, but those requests are into us from the people who manage those programs, and we would not be able to accommodate them. As I mentioned, we could do some Chromebook inclusion in this budget, but we would still have half of it that we would need to look to fund from our fund balance. There will be no replacement of smart boards like the one that we have here in any of the classrooms. We've done a lot of that over the years recently, so I think we're in okay shape. But we did say when we started down this road that we would have like a regular upgrade every year of a small percentage of it. We would have to forego that this time. There's nothing budgeted for additional funds for stipends. For our clubs, coaches, and all that. I'm sure that is something that it will be coming up in our negotiations, so we need to be mindful of that. There's nothing dedicated to a curriculum liaison and supplies for our new music program, which is starting up. But right now, that program does not have kind of a curriculum director like our other career and tech programs have. We're still waiting to see in terms of enrollment and what that job is going to look like, so there isn't a proposal in this budget yet about what that would be. We would have to find that money elsewhere. And one item that we almost never talk about anymore, but it's really something that we should have, and that is a contingency fund. The town has a contingency fund. It's money that is in the general budget that when things come up that you don't expect, you have money there to handle it. We have not been able to budget that way. So we have a situation where 4% to some folks may sound like a lot. It is not a lot. And it's the max that we can ask the town for, but we have been pointing out over the years that when we ask for 4%, it usually means that even with a $2 million increase to our budget, we're probably going to have to shave some things off in other places to make that work. It's not like we're adding 4% of staff, or we're adding 4% to our supplies. It usually means we're cutting back on those things in order to make room for things that are going up at a rate of higher than 4%. So that is my proposal. I don't know if there are questions tonight or comments. Certainly happy to start the discussion.
As I mentioned, this is the first time we see the superintendent's budget, so there's a lot of work to do before our final vote, but any questions right now? Okay, so we will take a look, and just as I mentioned to the members of the public, superintendent's proposed budget is not the budget the school committee has approved yet. We will continue to look at it and make adjustments as we think are appropriate.
Phil, it's online, right?
About that,
It is online.
I forgot, it's
Yeah.
online now.
Yes.
Okay,
It's
so
it's on the front page of our website,
I even made a note to say that.
nksd.net, for anyone out there in TV land.
Okay, then next would be any questions on CIP, existing bond, future bond? Any of the work's continuing, moving forward, planning on our future bond projects? And next we have, under the reports, disposal notifications and just the general financial reports. Any questions on those items from any members? And that is all. I just always make the point in the agenda packet, is the public one as well, is the printout of the checks issued by the school department in numerical and alphabetical order for anyone who'd like to take a look at those. Then we've reached the end of the agenda. If I could ask for a motion to adjourn. So I have a motion from Ms. Hoskins.
Second.
Second, Ms. Hildebrand. All those in favor? Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for coming.
We finished.